In this video, I want to go over what each drive mode in the 2023 Genesis G70 does and how it affects the drive experience. There are 5 drive modes in total. They are Eco, Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus, and Custom. So stick around as we explore each of these modes in depth. First, I want to start off with Comfort mode. This is the standard default drive mode. The transmission is responsive. It'll get after it when you put the pedal down, but the throttle response is not nearly as aggressive as it is in Sport mode. The suspension in Comfort is very soft and feels good. The steering is tight and responsive. The downshifts are hardly noticeable, with the ever so often rough downshift, which usually occurs from abrupt or hard braking. Now, some people have complained that the Genesis G70 has a very harsh transmission on downshifts. I personally do not have this issue. The only times I notice hard downshifts that are uncomfortable is when braking very hard in Eco or Comfort mode, or when driving in Sport mode. The downshifts in Sport mode are quite harsh, but I'm going to talk more about that later in the video. To sum up the Comfort drive mode, I would say it is as the name implies. You get a nice, smooth, comfortable ride with responsive acceleration, responsive tight steering, and a soft luxury suspension. Now, if you switch over to Eco mode, it makes the throttle less responsive and almost makes the G70 feel like a normal tame car that doesn't have absurd amounts of low-end torque. You can press the accelerator down pretty heavily and it will not shoot off like a rocket to the moon like it will do in Comfort or Sport mode. The car is still plenty fast in Eco mode, it just won't get up and go as aggressively as it does in the other modes. Putting the car in Eco almost seems to limit throttle response and how aggressive the acceleration is. Now, for the suspension and steering in Eco mode, it all feels the same as it does in Comfort. And as far as Eco mode goes in relation to affecting gas mileage, driving on long trips, I normally average around 30 miles per gallon, whether I'm driving in Eco or Comfort, and there seems to be no difference between the two in terms of gas mileage. I can't find any official guidance on if Eco mode actually does anything to improve fuel efficiency on the G70. However, there is an option in your car settings that will allow the transmission to decouple from the engine while coasting, which is supposed to save on gas mileage. I've personally never enabled this feature, so I can't really speak to whether or not it actually saves you gas mileage. I mean, how often are you ever coasting for long periods of time in your car and not giving it gas? For me, at least, this is never. So it's kind of a useless mode for me. The only big difference I can notice between Comfort and Eco is how much more limited engine power is and how much less responsive the throttle is, which is something I personally enjoy for city driving. Now, when you're feeling the need for speed, baby, switching this car over into Sport mode completely transforms it into an absolute friggin' beast. Sport mode opens up the 2 additional exhaust valves, cranks up the fake engine audio in the cabin, makes the bolsters in your seat tighten around you, which is an interesting experience. It stiffens the suspension, tightens the steering, and it remaps the ECU and transmission to make the engine and transmission super aggressive and super responsive. Going from driving this car in Eco mode every day and then switching over into Sport mode is like driving an entirely different car. The difference in sound, the difference in feel and performance is insane, and it still blows me away every time. Now, the downshifts in Sport mode are quite aggressive and intense, as I mentioned earlier, and they are what I would call borderline painful to some degree. An interesting observation I have noted while driving in Sport mode is that the car RPMs will hang out just above 2,000 RPM, and if you're not giving it throttle, it'll shift to automatically hover back around that 2,000 RPM mark. Now, because of this, for some reason, this makes the shifts extremely jerky in Sport mode. I don't know what it is, but the shifts, and mainly the downshifts, are quite harsh. I usually don't like to drive in the regular Sport mode for too long just because the transmission can be so jerky, but it is not this way in Sport Plus mode, which I will now talk about. In Sport Plus mode, all the same things happen as in Sport mode. However, traction control and stability control are disabled, or as much as modern cars allow it to be. And the car also will not shift gears until it redlines, nor will it downshift until you drop below a certain RPM range. So for example, if you rev the RPMs up to 6,000 and let off the gas, it is not going to upshift until you redline it. It will stay in that gear. Sport Plus mode seems to be a much more intense drive experience than the regular Sport mode. The car behaves entirely different and is more of a track-focused driving mode compared to the regular Sport mode. Genesis describes Sport Plus mode as, and I quote, specialized for at-the-limit driving on a track that goes beyond everyday sporty driving, end quote. Not that anyone who owns this car will ever be driving it on the track. Let's just be honest with ourselves. I would love to put this car on a track, but it's just probably never going to happen. Now, the last drive mode to mention is called Custom. This allows you to configure the drive settings how you want. If you want Comfort suspension settings, but the responsive engine settings of Sport Plus mode, you can do that. or if you want the engine settings of eco mode, but the stiffer steering and suspension in sport mode, then you can do that as well. I don't know why you would, but you can. So now that I've touched on all the drive modes, I wanted to mention that this car also has a manual shift mode. To activate it, you just click one of the paddle shifters and it will go into the manual mode. And the manual, or the shifts in the manual mode, I might add, are very responsive. It's almost like having a DTC type responsive. Now, if you're in eco or comfort mode, it'll change back into automatic mode in about 30 seconds if you don't interact with the gears, or if you redline the engine, it will shift for you. If you are in Sport or Sport Plus, it will stay in manual shift mode until you manually change it back, and it will also shift for you on redline as well. The car will not let you damage the engine or ping it off the engine limiter. So to manually change it back to automatic, you just press and hold the right shifter until it goes back to automatic. This takes about 5 seconds. So that pretty much covers what all the drive modes do. Again, I personally drive in eco most of the time just because I like the tame throttle response for daily driving, but when I'm feeling that need for speed, baby, I usually switch over to sport, and it's like driving an entirely new car. Now, if you're curious what the exhaust sounds like on this car, since we're talking about performance, I linked a video in the top right hand corner of the screen, as well as in the description. And I've also attached a playlist at the end of this video for all my other Genesis G70 content. So be sure to check out those videos as well. And also be sure to smash that subscribe button if you like all my Genesis content. I post new videos every Saturday at 12 p.m. I usually bounce around between making detailing content and then some kind of video related to the Genesis G70. So with that, we're going to conclude the video. As always, guys, thanks for watching and stay glousy.